forth. If you have a question, want to stop us, have a, observation, just chime in. It would be more fun if we all just kind of interact, right? So the general idea here is to broaden the perspective a bit and put sport in its context in a societal sense, right? And so when we talk about the idea of a triple bottom line event and events that are meeting the social context in which we're living and stepping up to the challenges that in truth humanity faces as a collective whole. How do we put sport in its context, recognize the influence, the leverages it has, and use those for good and to build brands that people want to believe in and can really get. And what are those things that it can do? So this is just to say, look, companies are really recognizing that we're in some tricky times. It's uneasy times. A lot of these crises that you'll see that companies are very aware of have to do with climate-related ramifications that we'll see more of in the coming century. And so just putting it all in context, sport doesn't happen outside of that realm. And so we need to keep that in mind as we plan and develop our events.
Okay. Do you want that one next?
Sure. So, well, and Eileen uses this language. I think I heard you refer to it as
the common language, the new common language.
Right. Because companies are using this language. These are the United Nations Global Goals for Sustainable Development, and so this is designed to be bite-sized chunks, understood concepts, right? Just simplify it, let's look at the problem, and then we can all, instead of everyone kind of going on their rabbit holes and working in their own ways with their own networks, let's just all say, we're working on 16, with this project, and use that as the lingo.
Yeah, it's definitely made it easier, when people talk about sustainability or social responsibility, it seems like huge, you're like, oh God, like you're blowing my head off right now. I don't know what you mean. It's too big of a problem to solve. But if you look at something like this, and even the simplicity that they've expressed these in, zero hunger, that's pretty easy to understand. So, as opposed to even a company saying, well, we're working on trying to blah, 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 and we're working with the food banks, and we're concerned about recovery and waste avoidance, and we're working on zero hunger. Okay, I get it. Okay, that's clear. Yeah, it's really helpful.
Right. So the "we're still in" idea, this is has to do with the Paris Agreement that the United Nations gathered in December of 2015 and got all of the world's major, all of the countries of the world to come on and sign the Paris Accord, saying that we're going to do our best to limit the global warming to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperature averages. And so that was a major international global win, so to say, to get to that. There's a lot of work to be done to reform business and the global economy as we know it to adjust to that because our energy sector is polluting, right? The energy infrastructure of the last 150 years has made a mess of the air. So now we got to clean it up, right? And it's just the reality of what we're doing. So this was an idea of groups, even though the U.S. pulled out, not formally, because Trump actually can't pull the U.S. out formally until 2020, the day after the election, as it were. But he has said that the U.S. will not abide by the agreement because he wants to find a better deal. But this was companies, city governments, regional governments, states, and NGOs across the board saying, we're still in, we're going to try to keep with some of those goals.
Folks who are involved in this, and so that there's no version of the Paris Agreement. There's one for corporations that's kind of the Global Compact, but there's one for sports that's going to be launched in December called the UN Sports for Climate program or initiative. So where teams are openly declaring just the same way that corporations have. Right.
And I think Sport for Climate Action is that one if you want to look that up.
Sport for Climate Action.
Sport and Climate Action. Another angle to look at this as is companies care about sustainability, and that includes sport entities and organizations. If consumers care about it and want it and are demanding it more and more, then companies they'll do well to respond, in kind.
And for the sports entities that aren't totally convinced, and they think, oh, that's a Patagonia thing, or that's a Ben and Jerry's thing, or that's those type of company things. It's actually these guys, and these guys represent, I think it's the top 25 sponsors in sports. These are the big spenders. So if they care, then your partnerships group better care and better understand that that's what they care about right now. So this isn't a sidebar movement anymore, as we've all seen. But the interesting note is that many of these top spenders in sports marketing and sports sponsorship are also all in and starting to move their messaging toward this. The last 3 large Super Bowl commercials from Budweiser have all been around issues like this. So if you go back to reduced inequalities, their 2017 ad featured the story of Adolphus Bush as an immigrant, right at the time where we were having some border issues. This year, 2 of their spots were about water. Budweiser spot about responding to crisis with the canned water and their ability and willingness to do this. And I will tell you that they're not the only ones who do that. The other brewers actually also do it. But they made a point of using some spending dollars in their biggest moment to talk about that. And their other spot was a Stella Artois spot, which is one of their brands, which is, if you've seen it, Give a Lady a Drink, features Matt Damon. Again, huge money, and these are the topics that they're choosing to spend it on. And the moment they're choosing to spend it is in sports. As I think we've heard this quoted a million times, but about 68% of the population pays attention to sports, and about 11% pays attention to science. But now everybody's got the attention.
Can you hang on that slide? Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add is looking at this, and there's a full-on sustainable business revolution happening, and it's very interesting that there's a near media blackout about that. We're not hearing about it. So I'd like to say the revolution will not be televised because, but it is happening. So I jotted down a few stats that I was personally very encouraged by that came out of the Global Climate Summit, which happened last month in San Francisco. So the United Nations gathered businesses and NGOs, a large cohort of stakeholders from all sectors, and a few of the stats I jotted down were at that summit, 488 companies adopted emissions reductions plans that are in line with the science and the framework set forth by that Paris Agreement, and they represent $10 trillion of the global economy, so that's equivalent to the NASDAQ as a whole. And those are companies saying, okay, we get it. We're part of the problem. We want to be part of the solution. We're gonna pivot. We're gonna transition. It's gonna be part of our strategy. This is gonna be how we do the new business in the 21st century. 23 multinationals with revenues of $470 billion committed to taking their fleets to zero emissions. So they're saying, okay, we'll go electric, we'll go hydrogen, we'll test out this new stuff. We'll be on board. And 42 financial institutions representing $13 trillion in assets committed to helping finance those changes.
Green financing is a huge. Bloomberg is running some amazing summits around that, and they're expecting disclosures at quarterly calls that are talking about what's your exposure to climate risk, any other risk that a business faces. The other interesting thing that larger investor groups are starting to say is we don't want a separate sustainability report. That should be part and parcel of your annual report because it is part and parcel of your business risk going forward. So we don't want to hear about it occasionally or over there in a different format. We're expecting that to be mainstreamed into the way you're communicating with investors. So that's kind of the global context and a little bit of diving into the sports context. And just to bring it on a little bit, Shelley and I both participate a fair bit with a group called the Green Sports Alliance. So that's kind of the foundation of some of these, what I've done here with this graphic. But 100% of the Major League Baseball teams are part of that alliance and have commitments and initiatives that they're undertaking largely to manage their energy. And the league, as a league, has a policy So if the logo is colored in, that means the league itself has an initiative and some dedicated resources. Up until very recently, that NFL logo was gray. It was not filled in, but they're getting better. 100% of NHL teams, and dedicated effort, not just environmentally, but so you can see the numbers here. You know, surprising a little bit in a way that MLS is lagging. And we do keep these numbers current, so every time they add an MLS team, I recalculate. But they have the youngest and the most urban demographic, really, of their in-game fans, the attendees at the actual game. I mean, the NBA obviously has a very urban appeal, but it isn't necessarily the urban dwellers, the city dwellers, that are at those games, right? Put the state of green in perspective. I try to update it quarterly.
And the one that I would add to that too is that the IOC has embraced a sustainability platform and built out some resources, and actually they just put out a series of guidebooks to say what sustainability means to them as a Olympic committee, as a federation of federations essentially, so that they can give guidance to the governing bodies to say, here's what it means to us, and here's what we think that might start to look like for you in your operations and your events.
We want to get down into events, but just quickly to run through these. You know, why should climate matter to sport? You know, just quickly to go through these images. The top, that's your left, my right, right?
Yeah.
That's when the New York City Marathon was canceled due to Sandy. So I guess this woman decided to run it on her own. At the Super Bowl in Dallas, that got blizzarded out a bit and caused all kinds of havoc. Who was expecting, you know, all those years saying, well, we have to hold the Super Bowl in a southern city because well, that's out the window now, right? What else do we have up there? Oh, God, and I'm in front of some of it. It's not hitting the screen, but and that overlaps you can't see it very well, but the race route with the wildfires that were going on in the state of Oregon that forced the cancellation of that event. Down here, I don't know if you probably follow cricket. This had to be called, and he's actually vomiting, passing out on the field. There's some amazing images from that game of what was happening before they finally called the game. And here, this young man represents high school football and college football, and how they're having to change their practice methods because of all the heat stroke. You know, and that was a stat that I happened to look up on that. And they're averaging 3 players a season dying from heat stroke. That doesn't maybe sound like a lot, 3, but I don't know, 3 people is a lot. And when you consider how many people are playing high school football, in a way, that seems like an inordinate death rate for high school kids. Unacceptable. How it's affecting them. But we have some good news stories about sport and climate adaptation. The one image is of the Denver Broncos. They actually, you know, I call this sport climate adaptation a reward usually. They adapted their irrigation system. They were facing a bit of a crisis. There was a drought on. They were under watering restrictions. They're like, well, we can't work with, you know, Tuesdays and Saturdays to water the field. It has to be ready. So they worked with their water provider to install moisture sensors and a selective watering system, as well as a gray watering system. And that ended up netting them $60,000 in rebates, and then would receive $18K in money from water savings that they had on an ongoing basis. So they turned, again, something that was definitely a risky situation to their operations into a is Norm Fossschulte from the Philadelphia Eagles. And they were recycling some of their cans, and then he was talking, they were getting, I think, about $80 a pound or something like that, $90 a pound.
A pound or a ton?
A ton, sorry.
Okay. I was going to say, I need to get into aluminum recycling.
And then he noticed, he's asked them, what happens to this? Well, we take it, and then we bale it, and blah, blah, blah. And he said, oh, well, you know, how do you bale it? Because he's just thinking about the space in the stadium, and, you know, we don't have room. And he goes, oh, and then they for he's like, wait a minute. how much does one of those balers cost? So they bought a baler, and now they're making all this exorbitant money. I think it's like 80 grand a year or something on their recyclables, just the cans.
Funds
And they're using those funds to do other sustainable things in the operation, as well as reward the people who actually physically sort their trash. And we won't go too deep in these other things. They're just meant to, give you a few snapshots. And then, of course, there's the platform of sports and on the social justice side of how well that can be used. So I'm flipping it back over to you, Shel.
Let's go back one.
Sorry.
There were a couple good pictures there. Let's just dwell on for a moment. I think I'd just like to say, again, this kind of comes back to that whole sport doesn't happen in a bubble bit, right? And what we're seeing with the kneeling and the conversation that has spurred from that. I mean, how many people have had a conversation about that in the last year? I mean, and how many? And just imagine what that's doing to bring it to the front of the sort of social vernacular, to have conversations about racial equity and about what that means in modern day women's sport, right? And Emma, I think the National Women's Soccer League just announced that there were going to be large, or maybe it was USA. It was the Olympic women's team saying there were going to be large pay increases for women's soccer. LeBron gets a bunch of attention for riding his bike. This was back when he was with Miami. I don't know if he did that I don't know if he does that in Cleveland. But
not anymore.
And then all the way back to the 36 Olympics. Yeah, okay.
68, I think. Or is it just
no, this is back earlier. This was sort of at the Olympics in Germany, and you see that and above on the podium of the racism and fascism that we were seeing in Germany at that time. So it was like this idea of like freedom in America and winning over. And so it's just, that is what really captures hearts and minds, right, about sport. Like we get into our tech and our data and and our sales bits and stuff, and it's just sometimes it's important just to pull back from that a bit and just remember the context that we're in. Over there is Jeremy Jones, who started a group called POW, Protect Our Winters, because his whole career and those of his friends and colleagues and friends and family where he grew up in mountain towns that ultimately and totally rely on the sport tourism industry for those communities to subsist. So he's advocating at the policy level. He's lobbying at Congress, saying this is our communities, this is our livelihood. So we need to address these issues. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, he's also a great pro snowboarder.
That's true. Yeah, and the media coverage for this is growing as well. But I think it's a good point to maybe just jump toward our case studies, because that's what you're here for. We were talking about, how do you develop, how do you fund, and how do you online implement these things that think about a lot of things. People are like, oh, well, that's extra, that's too hard to do, or we'd love to, but we have to do this and this and this first. But actually doing things in this way often opens up new avenues to revenue.
And there's a bit of boldness that has to come with it. Somebody's got to pitch it, right? Like if you have an idea for something, and so I'll just say that because I think that it's part of what that looks like. But the Waste Management Phoenix Open is in Scottsdale. Sorry, that's my phone. Ignore it. And they do a huge tournament. Is anyone familiar with the Phoenix Open at all? Okay, so they get more than 500,000 people through this tournament in the course of a week, or not even 5 days.
Yeah. 700,000 plus this year.
Yes, and so it's just this huge party in the desert, and you can imagine, that's a strain on resources for them. So they've had to be creative about it. They went zero waste in 2015. They took the trash cans off the course, and so then now it's just compost and recycle. Those are your options. They had to make a lot of adjustments operationally with hospitality to make sure that everything that was coming in could also go out in one of those two bins. But this was, for Waste Management as a title sponsor, an incredible way they can do. How they is business development, really, is here's what we can do this for you too. And they've done a terrific job. They turned these zero waste stations, they're old containers that they transferred into these kind of community engagement bits and education. They put up a little trivia thing, and you get a little prize or a drink ticket or something if you get it right. And so they are really educating people about what zero waste is, why we should care, etc. You can't see it too well, but over here, GEO is the Golf Environment Organization. It's a Scottish organization, but that is looking to work with golf entities worldwide to say, let's have some common best practice that we can all be judging ourselves apples to apples against, start to track and report against those. And so Waste Management Phoenix Open helped pilot a tournament standard so that at your resort, or your golf club, but tournaments are a big deal and they're a big mobilization of those resources. So they helped pilot that certification, and now there are, I think that was 2 years ago. Now there's 7 or 8 tournaments that are certified, and more coming online all the time. So that's positive.
So does everybody know what zero waste actually means when you say zero waste? Or here's a better one. Trivia question. What are the 2 items that enter on that golf course that can't be recycled or composted? Anybody know? Diapers and cigarette butts. So the way that they get to zero waste is those are sent to an incinerator, and that incinerator converts to energy. So it is then ultimately it is recycled into energy. But a tricky thing. Yeah. Tricky thing. Some things you can't get around in life. I guess dirty diapers are one of them. But what else we got here, Shell?
So this event, I really like. The Council for Responsible Sport has worked with the 5-Borough Bike Tour and their host, which is called Bike New York, for several years, and TD is their main sponsor, and TD likes sustainability. They have a full CSR program, and so they're like, yeah, we want you to do this stuff, and leadership got on board. But this event really was designed to drive their whole programming. So Bike New York does bike education, educate 50,000 people in New York every year, and so they're really doing advocacy for active transit, which just happens to be a carbon emissions free way to get around, right? And so it checks a lot of boxes, but this event fundraises for those programs to exist year round. They have the biggest bike expo in the country that gets huge turnout, and then it's just the fun of 40,000 people in the streets writing where cars go every day, and then saying, nope, we're taking the streets today, and we're doing it together, and we're going through all the 5 boroughs, and they just, it's become so popular. You're not a New Yorker until you've participated in this event, and so they've really wrapped it into their whole strategy about who they are, and this is how we do business, this is what we're about, and I like too, because some of the permanent venues and the sport franchises, even in the professional space, are doing more of the sort of participant-based events as community engagement to get some excitement, some spirit, some community going on. I think the Hawks do a 5K. Is anyone familiar with that one? But they'll do, an MLB All-Star game does a 5K, and just get people out there, because everyone's an athlete, right? I mean, not to be a Nike ad, but everybody, if you have a body, you're an athlete, and we all want to be out there being active together, and it's a great way to get people engaged.
But I mean, I think the key one here is that TD was driving that for them, saying, look, this is our DNA, so we expect it to be the DNA of the events that we're a part of. Brands don't mesh. And again, coming back to that slide of all those logos, that's what events are going to see more and more. If you want to retain those sponsors, you're going to have to align with their values. That's always been true in sports sponsorship, but now, fortunately for all of us, those values are all going in a very good direction, and that's where you can go back to that common language. If you're trying to pitch somebody, you can go, well, what's important to them. Look at their plan. They'll use that language in their reports and say, these are the things that we care about, so you can match them up.
Yeah. So how do you see then, like the latest Nike Kaepernick commercial coinciding with kind of the way the NFL has treated protest?
It has treated
As sort of treated both Kaepernick and protest, yeah. Like, are you seeing that's gonna?
Well, I mean, if you look at it from Nike's perspective, you know, and many of the brands who are taking these bold stances now, they're like, well, you know, yeah, some people decide to go out and burn their shoes, but you saw what happened the next day in the stock market, right?
Yeah.
Whole bunch of 20 to 40-year-olds went out and bought their stock. So they're like, you know what, we'll probably be fine. I mean, you know, as Bart Wiley yesterday morning said, but one of those old adages, you either stand for something or you fall for anything, right? So I think that's how that goes. I mean, as far as the NFL, you know, am I answering your question, or did you mean it in a different way?
I guess I meant it in a slightly different way. It was sort of, you were kind of saying at some point, right, that you know, the teams almost have to absorb the values of the brands that they're recruiting for sponsorship, and so we've got a situation here where I feel like you have the brand taking a very polar opposite stance than the league, where they're a very big sponsor and part of that. And so, do you think that somehow needs to? That's gonna be the start of a force to some change, or does that not?
Yeah. Well, I think in a lot of those cases, it's a lot like any other relationship, right? Either you grow together, you maybe grow at different speeds, and you can try to manage that as it's happening, or you grow apart. But I mean, at the end of the day, only, you know, a partnership will only be as valuable as when it's a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of situation. If they're not actually mutually gaining some additional advantage for their own brand, then yeah, I mean, it may be. But I will tell you, and I guess we're being recorded live, so you know, certain leagues and certain brands, you know, maybe they just. You know, something to think about in people had it. That's a great question. So this one's my example, coming from the Great White North, although I'm from the States, but I'm up there a lot. This is more on the social. Well, this is really the triple bottom line. So the Toronto 2015 PanAm Games, which is a multi-sport. It's like the North and South American Olympics, right? And not that many people are familiar with the PanAms. They're a little bit of a bigger deal in some sports than others. 42 countries. What do I have here? 36 sports. $1.4 billion budget. Half of that was like capital expenditure, upgrading facilities on the occasion of hosting. The other half was the actual operational expenditures, right? They made a concerted effort to say this is really important to us to use this occasion as a diversity and inclusion occasion. So we're going to make sure that we're going to go out and find as many diversity suppliers, because Toronto does have a lot of immigrants, and find out those people that are running these smaller businesses. They might be florists, they might be caterers. So that 3 or 4 maybe smaller catering companies could kind of create one temporary larger catering company, or you know, bid on that together. And they did an absolutely phenomenal job of this. They far exceeded their goals. They pulled in 5,000 different businesses to supply that event. They normally would have just watched that circus come and go to town and never had a part of it. Because many of those large events just look to the big, large international suppliers that can just turn on a dime. So it takes a little effort to say, you know what, it's really important to us that the people who are paying the taxes, that are bringing the public dollars, that are paying to fund some of this, are actually seeing that benefit. You can't just count on that trickle down, well, the whole city blew closed for a little bit. And I think everybody's getting smarter about that. That's one thing the IOC is leading people on as well. So at the end of the day, yeah, it was about, I think, it was 5,000 companies, but it was maybe about $7.5 to $8 million in business. It wasn't massive business, but if you were one of those small companies, if you were a caterer or a florist, and you had, I'm a PanAm game supplier on your window or on your website, imagine that people are looking at your company a lot, oh, wow, well, if they can supply them, I'm sure they're good. They must. So it really builds a lot of capacity. It builds a lot of confidence. It builds a lot of credibility for those businesses as well. And the other thing that happens in that occasion is you're not bringing things in from as far away. So you're lowering the carbon footprint. You're building on the social end by bringing these people in to the circus tent, and you're creating that economic impact. So the next time, when that circus is come and gone, everybody can look and feel good about what their city did, what they hosted, as opposed to going, well, yeah, it came, but what good was that for me? Those are projects that I love to work on. I didn't work on that particular one. I worked on one for the Women's World Cup, but I like what they did with diversity and inclusion and saying this is an occasion for us to help make sure that those small business owners that are just starting out in Canada are fully part of Canada. And this on the city level event side, which I personally love, this is a legacy from the Vancouver 2010 games. The city of Richmond is where our airport is located, and that's where the speed skating oval was. And so what they did was say, you know what, we did so well with the Olympics. We hosted a sustainable Olympics. Everything was spick and span. The guest experience everywhere people went was wonderful. How do we make sure that that lasts? That is the experience now that we've reached that level of hosting. And so one of the things that they did was create a sustainable events guide and toolkit. So when you now call to City Hall there and say, hey, I'm gonna have a block party, or we wanna have a music fest, or a big soccer tournament and we need the permits, they say, great, along with your permit, here's the event toolkit. We're gonna send out the bins, so those all have a uniform look and feel. We're gonna send out this portable water station. They just hook that up to the water line, has some filters in it, boom, refillable bottles. We're gonna dispatch the bike valet. And then we're gonna have this similar and some other signage and educational materials. So what do they get out of that? One, everybody that goes to an event in this city now is having that same elevated experience. The city gets a nice, neat event, no nasty overflowing bins, as we've all been to street parties, and they're a little bit, and it's a challenge for the city to empty those on time. But if they're in charge of the bins, then it's happening. The bike valet, boom, traffic headaches getting resolved, right? Well, I would take my bike, but it's probably gonna get ripped off. Oh, nope, we've got a valet. So it gets that unified look and feel. They get an occasion to educate, maybe newer folks to the city or visitors to the city. This is how we do things. This is how we compost. This is how we sort out the trash. This is how we get around by bike. Ooh, look, they're getting around by bike. Maybe I should try that next time.
Or your tickets, your bus pass for
Exactly. And the beautiful thing that they did with this when they launched it, they also brought in and invited the other surrounding cities, including the very large city to their north, Vancouver, invited all of the to teach you too. They're stretching that forward. And the final thing that they did with that, they did it as an event, and they brought in all kinds of environmentally friendly and local small business suppliers who were vetted and said, look, here's the coach line if you need a charter coach that is running biodiesel buses. Here's the compostable serviceware company that can do smaller quantities at a reasonable price so that you can use this nicer, better choice serviceware without breaking your budget. So they didn't just kind of come in as a municipality and say, no permit, you need to do this and this and this and this and this. Good luck. We don't know how you're going to do it. We don't know how you're going to get the budget to do it. They're like, you know what? Let's solve this together. So to me, one of the better and simple and beautiful Olympic legacies that we have, something that reaches everybody at the street level.
And which led to a lot of the work that the Council for Responsible Sport has kind of picked up on that and continued the research and we collaborated last year on a project with a group of urban sustainability directors. So that's the people who are sustainability for the city, and they put. So we had 8 partner cities who were participating and helping to around an event of 10,000. You know, be required to have a certain number of criteria met to get your permit, because we as a city have these goals, these sustainability targets that we're being held accountable to on. So this was research that we did last year. There were 8 participating cities: Phoenix, Houston, Boulder, San Jose, Washington D.C., Minneapolis, Eugene, and just compared all those kind of best practices. And basically, if you Google responsible event framework, it will bring you to a site, a microsite, that basically we broke down we tried to understand the ecosystem of large, as Eileen calls the circus event that we bid on and want to host, and tried to understand that ecosystem a little better. So we identified 5 key stakeholder groups that are kind of key to delivering a more sustainable, a more responsible event. So we looked at the cities, we looked at the sports commissions and travel bureaus, we looked at institutes of higher education that can bring research and resource, human resource too. The hosts being the owning properties, you know, the owners of the right. And we basically just tried to identify the value proposition for them to say, you know, what's our entry point to this conversation? Like, oh, it should matter to you. So we try to line that up, and then here's some examples where that's been done, and some templates that you might pick up and run with. So we're trying to get more and more cities to take a look at that framework and say, is this something that we want to adopt? And then work with all the partners, all the stakeholders in their town to talk about how do we take a more long-term approach to these events. It's great when an event comes through, but and we want to do more of that over the coming decades. So how do you create a framework that works, you know, for not just one, and you know, like you don't have to recreate the wheel every time. You say, oh, okay, we're doing a big event. So we're going to call in these partners, and these are the specific community activations, and we know that we have support from XYZ businesses that want to be in on that piece of it, and it kind of all starts to gel a little bit more easily instead of everyone just scratching their heads and going, we want to do it the right way. How do we do it?
Mm-hmm. But it does come down to making that, you know, let's say you're doing something that's a more modest event. You know, you're a community 10K, and there's of course another community 10K down the road, or you're all in the same town. You're doing them in different months, and everybody's hitting up the same sponsor. But if you're the one that walks in the door and says, "Well, this is how we do our event," you know, that we actually have an initiative as a corporate. Suddenly, you're setting your event apart, but you're opening a door to revenue where that might have been a no in the past. And I think for sports commissions who are in cities that are capitalizing on this, for the upcoming United bid, it's United hosting the 2026 FIFA Men's World Cup, FIFA has now said that every city that will host needs to have a certified stadium that's an ISO certification 2012-1. So right now there are 20 cities that are on the list to be potential host sites, but there will only be 16. So by the time they vet this out, 4 people are out. Only one of those sites right now is ISO 2012-1 certified, and that's the Philadelphia and Lincoln Financial Field. So guess how many sites are going to be scrambling in the next couple of years, actually the next year. I think they've got about 13, 14 months to show FIFA that they're 2012-1 certified. So all of a sudden it becomes real important to win business. It's nice to have anymore. It's a requirement to doing business, because that's what's coming down from, in that case, the rights holder. The World Sailing Organization has also indicated that they've also have that certification as an organization. And so they're only going to go and hold their events if you're coming to it from the hosting side or the venue side, the people, you used to be the ones going to, you're bidding for business, that business is going to start to ask some hard questions of you to win that business.
I get more and more calls about who are bidding on events saying, okay, the rights holder is asking how we're going to handle sustainability. Could you tell me about this certification you offer and how we can do that so that we can show them that we would be prepared to manage that properly?
It's the new Y2K compliant, if you're old enough to remember Y2K. And I think we just have a couple of visuals for you here. Again, these are the logos of the specific initiatives of the various leagues and some other entities, so IOC, FIFA, and then there's a few other, so the NBA has their environmental symbol and then their social outreach side. If you were around yesterday, you probably heard a lot from the Storm and a couple of sessions that we did and all the things that they're doing and how the breadth of what they're doing. This one outlines a number of organizations that are out there doing the support work to help both the properties and the rights holders get themselves sorted out, and also the places where the best practices are getting shared, and entities like POW, Protect Our Winters, that are advocates. And actually down in this corner are all the various organizations they're sort of associations of the sports entities. So I can speak, I know for the Green Sports Alliance, which is largely North American based, they have nearly 500 members. That spans all those folks on the slide from earlier from the major stick and ball sports, but also a number of universities, and then venues are also members of that. And then SANSI is European based, but more international in scope. The one at the bottom, Environment Alliance, is in Australia. BASIS is the British group, a lot of EPL and Wembley and all that jazz. That's all I've got.
Yeah. What catches your attention? What kind of things are you guys hearing in your realms about the triple bottom line or going beyond the bottom line? Is that kind of language coming more into your sphere, or not yet?
I'm always down to talk.
You jump on in there, Timmy. We count on your energy.
Right. No, I just want to say thank you both so much for this incredible work. My name is Timmy Foster. I'm a doctoral student at Northeastern University, and I am studying the different social impact and sustainability. It's around organizations that are partnering with athletes to champion social justice causes. And so just really, really, appreciate the parallels, because I'm looking from a social capital perspective, and so are you. And so, yeah, just another, I think, wing of research that I can get into, which is, I know when we met yesterday, we're like, yes, but just definitely, our world is, requires very, just a couple components to create sustainability. And I think our biggest stakeholders are human capital, right? So, just thank you for the work more than anything, and pushing my research lens as well. So.
That's great. Glad there's been some. We always like impact. Right. But it's interesting, there's a version of these goals, when you go and look for, and I believe I've looked for all kinds of graphics on these, they call them the SDGs, or the global goals. There's one that has them in 3 concentric rings, almost like a pyramid. Mm-hmm. And the basis of the pyramid picks out, things around water and land conservation. That's at the basis, like we need the habitat to live in. And then the next one up is sort of the people things that are, things around zero hunger and whatnot. And then the top level are things like, the social justice and partnerships and cities. But it's really interesting to look at it in that way, because they are all intertwined, right? And that's why we call it triple bottom line. Really, if you, kind of dovetail earlier, if you're only looking at and I hate when people call it the economics, because I was an economics major, so economics is also about people and social behavior. But if people are only looking at the financial transactional, they're usually going to miss out on the financial transactional in the medium to long term, if they're only looking at the moment. So,
there's so many things that money can't buy either, right?
Well, in a way, if, again, you may be shortcut, if somebody doesn't feel good about the transaction, then it's a momentary transaction and it's not gonna happen again. So that's also not sustainable. So, I think it's a good correction that we're all looking at, I think, our lives and our business in a more holistic way and going, well, wait a minute, how's it? But it's also funny to me because I feel like we're going back to the old school way that we did things where we did buy from our neighbor who was the grocer, or we didn't order groceries drone dropped to our doorstep. We actually went and had a conversation with the cashier when we, and
But could the drone drop grab, could it I don't know. I think that there's some interesting ways that we can leverage the technology, the innovation to bring those values to life, right? So if you value regional produce, there should be a way that you can, essentially show that preference and still have the convenience brought by the technology, ideally. And that's where we're headed, I hope. I think a lot of the global goals too are going to be driven by B2B interactions. So that's where, to me, sport is an amazing platform because there's this coalescence of industries, right? Because you've got sponsors and all these vendors and suppliers, and you've got your fans and your different stakeholders from all over the place. It's just such a wonderful convening space to bring people together. It's that is fascinating in terms of how you start to build a common language using the positive social influence that sport has in the sense that it's it's our society's largest institution for peaceful gathering. I mean, so how can we leverage that? That's value, right? That we can use.
That's right. Wherever Clevelanders gather, there's one thing we agree on: we hate Pittsburgh. Okay. Well, thanks so much, guys, for hanging in till the bitter end, for entertaining yourselves with this topic, and really appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you know what? It's funny, I like it.
Especially like what I've heard from my friend,
I'm getting it. Hey,
yeah, I love him. I love him too. But he's
we haven't worked specifically on something together yet, but we're plotting every day of the week. We're plotting.
He needs me to do something right now. Right, and that says a lot. So the number one and number two at the Citadel are now the number one.
So much about this industry. I mean, I can just listen to her. I can just listen to her talk. I'm just like, soak it in.
And like it's okay, like I'm not going to see how Charles can be a judge.
Now I don't know.
I guess maybe if I'm married,
But it's different.
not being a secure guy. But I love it. So it's just
like talking about a friend behind their back without saying, hey, you pissed me off, by going over here.
I did email with him.
So I'm like, I was,
You're like, I would say it, I just haven't.
yeah, I haven't said it, and so I'm not gonna have it.
He ended up hiring somebody that
Wow.
I had,
And you know what, if it's, I just come.
okay.
I'm like,
Jim
you
was
know,
the AD
when you did,
in Idaho. There's something about that you can't do it.
Yeah. Are you overseeing development?
Premium. Right. That's not happening anymore to me and my number two.
Okay.
So that's kind of cool. Where they're really going out and being a big donor. Where the thing that I love is we're really a la carte. So like my whole goal this year, I told Ryan and Brent, like I want to get a few big donations.
You want help with this?
You don't have to do bullshit.
Yeah.
How's Stacy doing?
Pretty good. Yeah, she's working for gosh, what's the name? It's an agency. It's a marketing agency.
She
Bendigo is the name of it.
Huh.
Which is basically just doing account management stuff for them. And like CHI or assistants or biggest account by your own account. Those are so big.
Yeah, they're huge. She did a good job with the Sounders. Her boss got fired for some things. Ryan Jones, or I don't know what happened, but he's a good guy. I worked with Brian
Seawolf stuff.
Did he open up about what happened or not?
No.
'Cause I heard some things inside, and I was like, well, I don't really want to spread any rumors, but I want this
I don't remember if it came from him directly or if I just heard the story that he had an incident.
Right.
Like in his
Yeah, exactly, just watch that.
he's a girl of some sort, and I don't know if he
Brian quite a bit.
Yeah.
Seawolf, so we've seen
How long?
You know, any number of things can cause people to burn.
Seawolf?
Like your player
Yeah.
from Miami.
Are you still with him?
No.
No.
So you and Judy are bound?
Yep. And so Brian's still contract because he's doing sponsorships, which they still need a lot of help with, but on the ticket side, they're pretty much sold out.
Yeah, oh, this is the next one.
So you guys don't come and then they just.
Yeah, I mean, Mary has brought in self groups, you know, what's his specialty, and what's the tickets on sale? So the first game right now. The fourth game is
Take this advice, right? Take that advice. Bow down and praise. On the queen.
He's like the biggest duck thing. He loves the freaking Utah Poison anything. They're fit.